So I am going to stop my share and then hand it over to our presenter, Portia. She teaches at the Lycée Français Dual Language School in New York and has some information to share with us about course building in CodeHS. So I will turn off my share portion and hand it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. Hi, my name is Portia Morel. I work at the Lycée. It's a French school on the Upper East Side in New York. And I am a computer science teacher there. I've been working there since 2017. And I am here to present to you teaching using CodeHS's new course building tools. Give me a moment and I will share my screen, and you'll also have access to the slides. Okay. So I will drop the tiny URL, but it is located on each page as well. There you go. And I will share my screen in full screen. Okay, so let's get started. The link for the tiny URL is at the bottom of each slide. So just in case if you get lost or if you were looking for the link, it's always there. So here is a table of contents for today's session. First is just a brief introduction, a little bit about me, the classes and grades I teach, and my class structure that I've chosen to use for this year. Remote teaching with CodeHS. This year I've been teaching completely online, so CodeHS has been really helpful for my classes, so we'll go over that. A display of student work that was produced today, not today, but this school year from a group of my students, as well as some strategies for next year as well, because we are ending this school year. So I'm sure many of you are planning for next school year. So these are just some ideas that I'm personally considering. So I also added them as some advice if you're interested. And last but not least, we have questions. So you can ask all of your questions at the end. So a little bit about me. I started computer science or teaching computer science or in the world of computer science in 2011 as a coding camp instructor, and was looking for ways to teach it full time instead of just the summer. My main specialty is in curriculum development for computer science. I also worked in after school, so I've done curriculum for camps and after school sessions, as well as regular school right now. And like I mentioned before, I currently teach at a French school, grades 8 through 10. And something else that's really interesting about me is that this is my first presentation that I've ever done. So I'm excited to share my knowledge with you. And if you hear any nerves, it's because of that. This is like my first rodeo, okay? All right, so here is the current structure of what I'm currently teaching. I teach 3 grades, like I mentioned before. I forgot to put this into the slides, but each grade has about 4 classes that I teach. So 8th grade, I teach 4 classes, 9th grade, I teach 4 classes, and in 10th grade, I teach 4 classes as well. And these are the coding languages. There are some digital learning things going on as well, but I did not put that in the slide. I just focused mainly on the codings. So in 8th grade, they learned Scratch and HTML and CSS. 9th grade, we did a lot of JavaScript, 2 sides. One is the art side using P5.js, and the other is JavaScript, specifically learning how to make applications with DOM. And then 10th grade, we learned Python, do a little bit of ethics and data science. So my class structure is a little tricky. It is short. We have 2 55-minute class blocks every week and a half. And so if I calculate the total number of hours the students have with me, it's about 48 hours and then for the entire school year, and if you subtract sometimes cancellations, I would say on average we have about 40 to 44 hours with the students each year. So it's not a lot of time, but we get a lot of things done because my approach to teaching is self-paced learning. So even if we don't finish it in class, they can pick it right back up and do it at home. And the other issue I have, or thing that I have to adjust for, is that my school is a bilingual school. It's a French curriculum. So we do tend to have some students who come from France and English is their second language. And so I've learned over the years for working at this school that I need to make sure all of my resource sources are in English and in French in order to be able to reach all of my students. Any questions so far about anything that I've had so far? And just pause. No. Okay. So the approach. Well, I will say the approach to me was a trial and error during COVID. Our school decided to do a hybrid model, but specific classes like computer or computer science was listed as remote. We didn't really get any training on remote, so it's kind of just trying to figure it out. We were required to attend this conference called the AMLE conference, which is the Association for Middle School Middle Level Education. And there was this one presentation that was transforming my structure of how I was going to do my course remote that I attended in, like, school started in August. So it was in October that I attended this workshop, and this actually helped me design the courses that I've been designing with CodeHS. So the name of the presentation, you can actually Google it and find it, is the design principles, designing online instruction for the middle school grades, what makes for effective learning. And it was presented by Dr. Brian Dorst. And there were a couple of things that he said or gave us that I thought was really useful to what I did. So I also put them in this slide set. The first one is the 5E model of instruction. There's a link for more details as to what this is, but pretty much it's a process to really evaluate how you're building your online course. And the whole point is to evaluate, and that's why it's in the center, but how you evaluate can change based off of if you're trying to explain, elaborate, engage, or explore. So I briefly use this model. I do want to spend more time in the approach, but this is one of the approaches that I thought was helpful to share. The other one is the 5 pillars of successful formative assessment. There's a link in here as well for more details. But the 5 key strategies are to share learning expectations, elicit evidence, feedback, self-assessment, peer assessment. And these are things that I've already believed in just by trial and error. So I love the fact that I found something that also matched up with my own belief system and self-assessments. Okay, so based off of the 2 pedagogical approaches that I shared, I tried to do this first before I did use CodeHS. I tried to do this with Google Classrooms. So we're allowed to use Google Classrooms this year just because of the pandemic. And the space for Google Classrooms is kind of open-ended. So I was kind of struggling with trying to figure out how to organize things with Google Classrooms. And so this is a sample of me organizing my units for Scratch with my 8th graders. There's no editor for Scratch on CodeHS, so I chose to use Google Classroom to try to structure it. And one thing that I learned was that putting things in sequential order and also kind of putting it in in a way that follows, leads towards turning something in was really useful for the students. So that's why you can see with them making the platform game, number one is to set up the game, then add gravity, add winning sprites, and then add 3 extra components, then turn it in. So the chronological order thing was really helpful for my students to keep track of their work. And they knew that once they hit step 5 in this game, they would just be done with the project and turn it in. And so these other steps were not parts that they needed to turn in, but just do. Any questions so far? No. It's so weird. Everyone's quiet. Okay.
Portia, I'll pause you for a second. We had a couple of questions come in on the parking lot document.
Okay.
The first one was, can you tell us more about your computer science journey? Were there specific classes you took, high school, college, languages, people, or experiences that kind of developed your interest in it?
Got it. So my passion for computer science comes from actually taking a computer science course in 7th grade. Back then there was no Scratch, so my first language was Logo, which is still used today, but it's called Turtle now. And when I went to college, I pursued computer science as a degree, but life happens, and I finished it in liberal arts, but with a whole bunch of computer science course credits. And so from that, I worked in after school for about 4 or 5 years before I got a full-time position working at the school that I work at today. So I come from getting experience as a instructor from summer camp to getting experience as a curriculum developer and instructor for after school. And then now I'm a full-time teacher. Yeah.
Awesome. I think there was one more question in the chat. What specific material do you use to teach social media to your students?
So social media, that lesson comes from Common Sense Media Education. There's curriculum now that Common Sense uses or has created for grades. I think they're now K through 12, or they're working for K through 12. So I used, for 8th grade, there's this specific lesson about digital media use. And that's what I use for my curriculum with some adjustments. So that, once again, that was Common Sense Media. They have a digital learning lesson or framework for K through 12. Any other questions?
Sure, let me go back to the parking document real quick. Do students turn in links to their Scratch projects from the Scratch site when they're working on material for you? So
for proof for this unit, the students had to do they had 3 ways to turn in this work. So they either could have shared the Scratch link, but there are some issues with sharing of Scratch links if you're not a Scratcher, meaning if you didn't verify your accounts, the links don't work. So I've had that issue with my students, especially because I'm remote. So I gave them 2 other options to be able to show their work by taking screenshots of their final project with their code. And also the other option was to turn in a video of them playing the game and showing the code of the project.
Awesome. I think that's everything we have for now if you want to continue.
All right, cool. Thank you. See, I love the interaction. One day I'll get there with a really interactive workshop, but keep the questions coming. All right, so let's get into CodeHS course building samples. So I'm going from Google Classroom, and I use Google Classroom for languages that don't work in CodeHS, and Scratch is one of those. So I decided to just use Google Classrooms. But I could have put this in, yeah, I could have put this in CodeHS if I wanted, but anyway. So CodeHS. So I was so happy to get the email of using CodeHS and being able to edit or create your own courses. So I am a free user for the courses, but I did for the past 4 years, I've been using CodeHS for as is, like choosing different lessons and modules that CodeHS already has, and I would assign it to my students. But I had some issues with some of the lessons just because of timing and also the language barrier. I needed to add French to it. So I was so happy to find out that we can finally do our own things. So here are some samples. Before I get into the samples, I did add this slide just so you can understand the course building structure if you have never seen it. The top section of your course is obviously your course name, but each unit is separated by a module name and then followed by lessons or the name of the lessons. And then inside of each lesson, you can have assignments. On the right-hand side, I posted the current available assignment types. So you can put a coding exercise, which is an open space or sandbox style. I use this one a lot when I'm trying to get the students to just do something creative, because this has no testing behind it. It's just an open space for the kids to code. Quiz is pretty new, so I haven't really used this one yet, but there is a new quiz assignment type, practice problems. So these are auto-graded. So there's only a few languages that work with this. And I think they're Python, Java, and JavaScript. So I don't really use this one that much in my classes just because I do a more creative approach, but I can see this being really useful if you're trying to test their ability to solve problems. Video, to embed videos, I use this a lot. Article is the light bulb. Notes is just regular text. Free response is just an open space for them to type. And then embed, which is to embed any other activity from a different website. This is also useful. So these are the different things that you can put in your assignments. And so here are some samples. So for ninth grade, out of all the grades that I taught this year, I purely used CodeHS for ninth grade for the first and the second semester. So you'll see a lot of samples from ninth grade just because it's actually the one grade that I use CodeHS almost throughout the entire year. So here is how I decided to organize my course. So this is the first semester of ninth grade, and they were learning P5.js, which is a artistic JavaScript language. And the first thing I kind of built this along the way. So it actually took me a while to figure out what I wanted them to do for their final project, but I have a better view or scope for my second semester. But if you notice, I started to label them as like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then the final project. So organizing it this way has been helpful, and each lesson kind of builds up on its own. So we start off with simple shapes, lines, colors, custom shapes, variables, and interactives. Learn about functions, and then we jump to our final project, but we have a section for like help videos in there. Here is an expansion of the first 3 lessons. So I would say that when you're building a course, that it's really helpful to have some type of pattern. So it's not as you can see, my pattern is not consistent in my first semester. I was just trying to figure this out, but what I did learn about this is that you should have some type of presentation or video, some example codes for them to interact with and look at, and then also some type of exercise. And this kind of goes along with the style that CodeHS already does with their lessons in their courses as well. Okay, oops, where am I? And here is a view of my final project, which was a little bit different. So trying to do a final project online completely had its own challenges, but we pushed through them, and we actually came up with a really good projects at the end. So what I did was a lot of embedding in articles. So I did like a rubric, some type of resource place for all of the commands that they could use. I tried to do this live chat. It's an embed, but it's supposed to show you a website that goes to a live chat to communicate with me. So some form of communication I need to work out with that in the future. Some examples as always, and then a place for them to do their final project. And the free response was just for them to reflect on what they created. And I'll show you some samples of this project. The final project was for them to build a scene using all of the tools that they know how to draw. And then they took the scene and also had to make it interactive. So if I go back to the lessons that they have, the first 4 lessons are just about drawing. And then the last 3 lessons, and even the 8th for help, is all about interaction. So how to make things more interactive than just drawing. So they had to put both of those concepts together. Here is an example of semester 2 for 9th grade. So I got a little bit better with trying to figure out how I wanted to structure the course. And this unit was a little bit shorter, and it's only a module. I can show you what the 9th graders look like, but it's just another module, as well as the P5JS being another module in the same course. So they had 6 or 5 lessons that built up to the 6th lesson, which was to make a quiz game. And they learned how to use JavaScript, but they were already learning JavaScript in the first semester using P5JS. So it's just kind of a transition into this different view of JavaScript. And they learn how to build and use CSS as well as JavaScript. They've learned CSS the year prior in 8th grade because they learned HTML and CSS as well. So it's kind of a continuity thing for the students. And here is my examples for semester 2. As you can see, I finally figured out how to do the pattern thing, which is to do presentation, example codes, and then an exercise. I will say one thing that I would probably change for next year is my first unit or my first lesson in a unit always has 2 exercises. And for some reason, when the students are following along, if they are behind, they seem to forget that there's an extra exercise in this. So, and I think it's just because it's not consistent. So I think in the future, I would just do 1 exercise for each lesson, to be honest. More examples, and that's it. Before I get into the samples, this is another example of 8th grade. So 8th grade started in Scratch using Google Classrooms. And then in semester 2, they learned HTML, but modified. So this is my version of doing HTML lessons. And I actually did apply that whole rule of 1 exercise for 8th grade, which is presentation, example, and exercise. I would also give some advice about what the exercises should be. It's better, especially the younger they are, it's better to have exercises that are more personal. So with HTML and CSS for 8th grade, I had them create a web page about their favorite links, like the websites that they like to go to. And then when they were learning about images, I asked them to create a personal library of about 5 photos. So putting that extra personal touch is really helpful because it's kind of like a buy-in for the students. I think the next slide is about student samples. So I'll pause and see if there are new questions.
Sure, we had one on the parking lot. How much
Mhm.
time do you spend outside of class developing your lessons?
So this one is a um it's kind of tricky because it is time consuming. Um and for me, what makes it time consuming is just being creative uh, as to figuring out what I want the students to produce. So for me, we only have a short amount of time, so I'm trying to get a lot in at one time as well as keep their interest. And so all of my exercises are kind of custom to what I think the students like or the feedback that I've gotten. So that is the part that takes a while for me to figure out. It's just like what final project I want them to do or what exercise I want them to do. The coding concepts are fine. Like just doing a quick presentation about, I don't know, images. You can find those resources online and just make a presentation. You could even give example codes, but like I mentioned before, sometimes I'll just like walk away and do other things and but think about what I want them to produce. And so this is the part that takes um I can't give a number. I just know that it does take some time. Like it just takes some time just for you to think of new ideas for exercises. So like I can give you an example that isn't shown on here. I think, oh, in ninth grade in semester one, there's a lesson that I want them to always do. I've been doing it for a couple of years. It's called the emoji challenge, where they choose an emoji and every student has to have a different emoji and I have to approve it so they don't do one of the simple ones like a circle. But they have to get creative and look at the emojis that exist on their phone and figure out which ones to make. So they have a lot of fun with that. So trying to keep it authentic is the part that takes a while to plan. I hope I answered the question. Yeah.
And more on lesson planning, we know all of our students, they work at different paces. Some finish things very quickly, some require a little bit more time. Do you plan enrichment activities for students who work really fast?
So that's a good question. So my version of enrichment right now, and I know I can do better, but I don't have that many students who are that far ahead. So the way that I've decided to approach enrichment until I have more time to put more um, extra things in is to keep the projects open-ended. So let me go back and show you the two projects that I'll show you samples for that are open-ended enough for the students to go above and beyond if they want to. So the final project for semester 2 for ninth grade was to build a quiz game. And they have like 4 different sample codes that have the same pattern, but you can choose to do other things with that code. You can make your own code, which I have some students who have done this, but they all get a basic structure, but what they do with that structure is open-ended. So yeah, so right now my form of enrichment is to just keep the projects open-ended enough for the students who want to go further, as well as providing them extra material. So when in semester 1, when they were learning, when they were doing their final project for P5JS, I had extra videos. I don't think I have an expansion of this, so I'll have to show you in actual CodeHS, but I had extra videos that I never taught the students. And those who wanted to go further could use those videos to produce a better final project. So yeah.
More questions. I know you
Mhm.
said you're going to click into your CodeHS account. A bit later, we'll do that to see what some of the content looks like for the students. But when you're making
Mhm.
instructional presentations, is there a tool that you use like Google Slides?
I use Google Slides. Yeah, use a lot of Google Slides because it's easy to embed the Google Slides into CodeHS. Yeah.
Awesome. And then teachers everywhere, standards-based instruction is really important. So how do you
Mhm.
communicate to your students the standards that are being covered in their course material?
That's a good question. So that's actually something that I've been reflecting on in preparation for next school year. So my school, I work at a private school, so I kind of have free reign over what I do. But I've recently wanted to go more standard based, just so that the students can know exactly what they're getting into and what they're trying to accomplish. So with the standards based part, that's something that I think should go at the beginning of your course. So you can make modules or units, and so you can have like unit 0, which puts all of the standards or all of the things that the students will be able to accomplish in one section. You can also, you know, if you want to apply the standards, you can also either add them into the presentations so that they know what standards align with what they're learning, or add another assignment type, which always just has the standards and goals as like the first thing before you put the presentation and everything else in it. Yeah. Any other questions?
I think that's all we have for now. I think the next slide
Okay.
shows some student work I'm sure the teachers would love to see.
Yes. Okay. Student work. So this is the reason why I really wanted to do this presentation. I felt that this year was really successful in the sense of how far the students were able to go, especially being completely online. And so these are some samples for mostly 9th grade. There was one 8th grade project in here just so I can show you. But like I mentioned before, 9th grade is in here a lot because I completely used CodeHS for it. So A Little Hope and Cows and UFOs are 2 P5JS projects that I just chose from student work. They all created amazing things. These are just like 2 that I know that the students really got into it. There are more. And then at the bottom, these are the most recent projects that the students turn in, which is to make a quiz using JavaScript and DOM. And on the right is the recipe page using HTML and CSS. So I'll just go in order. Let me just minimize because I know it'll open up. I realized I could have put this in CodeHS's CSS sandbox, but I'll do that later. So this is a piece that a student did where you hold down a key and different quotes. Let me see if I can zoom in. Different quotes and animations will appear. This is a student who has only been with me for 1 year, and that is 9th grade. So she's only been here for this 1 school year and has taken this to her own level. Oh, there we go. Of understanding. But yeah, so this is a student who has actually gone above and beyond with the tools that were given and the skills that they learned. So she did a kind of like looks like a presentation, but it's not, I guess, like of quotes, and it's done completely in P5JS. So that's this, and it's interactive. You have to click any key to get to the main area, but then for the quotes, it seems like she put them in numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4. All right, here is another sample of P5JS from semester 1. So he did a cow and UFO. The UFO can move with the arrow keys. And so when you look at the shapes are simple, but the whole color design and the look of the scene was also really important for this. For me, it was more about like the creativity, not really about the shapes, because you could say that this is easy code, but I also wanted them to put their own artistic view into it as well. All right, here's a sample of the recipe page. So the students, they had 6 lessons, and the 6th lesson was pretty much putting everything together, of all the things that they learned, which is learn how to do a photo, text, list, and a link and some CSS. So this was their project. They had to choose a recipe that they like and then build a web page around it. They have one more project that they're working on now, and that's to build like a small website in a group. All right, so down here are my most recent projects with 9th grade. They had to make a quiz game of 10 questions. So this is one sample where the requirements were for them to have input boxes where they can type in something into the box and get the answer, as well as buttons that will be multiple choice buttons. So they had to have 2 types of questions in their quiz game. So if I type or click, an alert will pop up on the screen telling you if it's correct or not. So this is one version. This student made a quiz game for Python. And as you can see, like some students did extra stuff. So you guys could interact with these as well. And last but not least, a general quiz, which most students did, a general quiz that had no theme, and did like the whole multiple choice and input box thing again as well. Okay, any questions about the student samples? There's only one other slide I have left anyway, so we're good, we're on time.
I don't see any questions. I think the teachers are just kind of clicking around, interacting. Those are some really cool projects your students did.
Yes, I'm so proud of them, especially because of the times that we're in. You know, they could have turned in blah, but they took pride in their work. And I think it has a lot to do with making it personal and them seeing the value in what we're doing. All right, so my last slide, and then there's just space for questions. We only have 7 minutes left. Is what my plan is for next school year. So we're ending the school year. So this is when I start to plan for next school year, especially because if you're trying to build a unit that is cohesive, it takes time. And you think that you have all the time in the world at the beginning of the school year, you know, when you come back and you have orientation or whatever, and then everything is like go and you have no time. So these are things that I'm reflecting on for this upcoming school year. The first one is standards and goal alignment. So I would really recommend, after spending a year trying to figure out what I wanted to do, what I wanted the students to accomplish, to have standards and goals of what you want the students to be able to accomplish first. Like that should be it's kind of like an outline. It's a brainstorming of what you want them to do, what you want them to accomplish, and then you figure out how to get there later. And so that's one thing that I'm planning to do. I have, in my case, standard alignment is complicated because I have the French curriculum to consider, and I also have just like US CSTA standards to consider as well. So it's a combination of both for me, but they kind of overlap in many ways, so it's fine. The other thing that I am very interested in going along with is, or aligning with, is master grading. And it's more about grading the student for not just what they've completed, but also what they've mastered. So you can think of it like as like 0 to 100%. If they hit 100%, they've mastered that concept. So that would also go along well with goals and standards. So once you have your goals and standards, you can also grade based off of how far they are along with those goals or standards. And so there's a link to the Cults of Pedagogy. If you don't follow them, you should. I get an email whenever, I think once a week, of like the podcast and also new posts. And this also helps me think about new ways to format my my work or my units so that they are more inclusive. Last but not other two things are to plan at least 1 unit ahead. So I was planning along one step at a time at the beginning of the school year. And then once I hit the second semester and I had my own pace, I was able to figure out, okay, I need to think a little bit more ahead. I need to think to the end. So I think knowing what direction you're heading and also letting the kids know what direction they're heading allows them to just be able to see the end of the tunnel and also just know like why they're doing this. Because my students will ask, they're like, why are we doing this? What is the point? So I think it's really helpful to just know what you want to accomplish, and for the students to also see the whole entire unit. And then last but not least, I would say is to simplify the number of learning tools. There are a lot of learning tools out there. And they're cool, but I have to sometimes just sit down and really reflect on it. Is this tool really worth it to incorporate another tool into my tool set that I already have? And if you can incorporate it into your learning system, CodeHS or Google Classrooms or whatever you're using, then it does require the students to log in and also have to get used to another like location of things. So I just would recommend reducing as much as you can the number of learning tools you use. Some of my favorites, quizzes. It's Quizzizz, something like that. That's like my #1 tool that I really like to use with the students. Google Slides is another best friend. Those are the top 2 ones that I can think of right now. Quizzes is my favorite. And that's it. And I'll just leave this space for questions since we only have 2 minutes left. Yeah. Time flies. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the only thing we had was a couple of teachers wanted to actually see what your course looks like in CodeHS and how the students interact with it. I have that link pulled up and can share it, or if you have access to it, I can chat it to you real quick.
Just like my view or the student's view?
Kind of just like a preview button. I'll send you a link really quick.
Okay.
Okay, so I put that in the chat for you, Portia. If you pull that up, it should kind of open it up from the student view, an intro lesson going through the different activities in the sequence.
It's weird. It says not found. Oh wait, there. Oh, it just reloaded as the teacher, but
Okay.
I can, I can just do. Hold on. Okay, show my screen. All right, so this is 9th grade, and this was semester 2, and I mean semester 1, and this is current semester. So when the students see this in the student view, they just don't see the extra things like this stuff. They just see the text parts. So it comes not expanded. It just looks like rows of lessons. I don't post these all at the same time. I post them on the day that I have the class. So I would not suggest posting everything, but you could give the students an overview that they can see where they're getting to, but not have access to the actual lesson yet.
Yeah, and I was looking at one earlier. Would you scroll down to your P5 class? There was one that was really cool. Lesson 1.5, mouse variables, I think. If you just click into the first lesson, if you click that eyeball to the right.
This one? Which one?
Up a little. Yeah, you can click that preview and that'll open up the student view for them.
Okay. So should I show code? Okay, so this is just if I do the preview so you can see. So this is the student, this is my lesson that I did during that day. And we did it live, and then I posted the code. And then the students can continue and also see the presentation. So this is embedded in. Then we have, I had 2 lessons in here, or 2 exercises in here. So they had to make an interactive picture. And so I have instructions in English and French, and then they have open space. So this is a sandbox style. I do start off the code because I know that they're still learning how to set it up. So you can actually put code in there for them to have before they start coding. And here is an example of the traffic light. So the students had to make a traffic light. It had to be interactive. Does this one also have show exercise? No. In P5.js, they don't give you the option to show a sample on the side, but in HTML and CSS, if you can show a sample to the students of like what the page should look like. Any other questions? I know we're over time now.
We have one last one. Do you have a good strategy on managing any group work that you give to your students? Do they work in pairs any?
So right now, my 8th graders are working in groups. I would limit the number of students in a group to 2 to 3, because once you start, for coding, once you start to add more students into the group, it's like, well, what are they going to be responsible for? One other new thing that I've tried, or cool trick, is like, so the students are making a final website. And so if the group is kind of big, I have one group that is actually 4 and not 3. And what I did with that group was, the rubric still applies, but the difference is that each group member has to be in charge of a web page. So they have to be responsible for at least one web page, so that I know that they're actually contributing to the group. So giving them roles and also giving each student responsibility will also help with accountability. Any other questions? Okay, just in case if you didn't have the presentation, I thank you so much for attending my first presentation ever. I hope you guys got some interesting or cool tips and tricks, or feel inspired for next year. And I will see you soon. Maybe, maybe I'll come back next year for the next year's conference.
Yay! Thank you so